Greetings everyone, my name is Emmanuel and I would like to welcome you to our program today. We are continuing with our series on rebuilding a new Africa through decentralization. And our topic today is the role of the church in a democracy. The role of the church in a democracy. Now, in a democracy, the church is under what we call civil society organizations. Now, in a democracy, there are essentially four pillars of power. The first pillar of power is the government or the state. The second pillar of power is the private sector or business. The third pillar of power is the civil society organizations, and the church is included or is under the civil society organization. And some people say the fourth pillar of power in nations, is the media. Now, in the 1960s, when most African countries got their independence, they adopted a centralized system of government. In a centralized system of government, power is concentrated in the hands of the ruling class. Power is concentrated in the hands of the president and his aides. So economists and other political scientists discovered, not just in Africa, in other developed countries, that governments in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and maybe 70s, were becoming inefficient in the satisfaction of the needs of the people. You see, one of the reasons why governments are established is to meet the needs of their citizens. But when governments begin to grow, they become inefficient in the satisfaction of the needs of their people. And because of globalization and international trade and the interconnectivity of trade around the world, economists began to also realize that what happens in China can affect, the people who are living maybe in America or in Africa or in Nigeria or in Cameroon. What happens in France can affect people who live in Cameroon. What happens in America can affect people who live in Kenya. So because of globalization, because of international trade, because of interconnectivity, as a result of international trade, we just saw that example of the coronavirus, something that started, some people say in China, and the thing, spread all over the world because of international trade and the interconnectivity that is happening around the world as a result of globalization. So because of the inefficiency of governments and because of international trade, governments around the world began to realize that they have to, decentralize power to the private sector and to the civil society organizations, so that the private sector and the civil society organization will be able to efficiently meet the needs of the people. So decentralization is the transfer of power and resources from the central government to the private sector and to the civil society organization, so that these institutions will efficiently and effectively meet the needs of the people. So you see why it is important for the church to be actively involved in politics, because the church will be able to meet the needs of the people, in their communities and nations. So efficiency in national development is an important role of the church in a democracy. You see, even the secular people understand that the church must be involved in politics. Why? Because the central government or the national government cannot meet all the needs of the people. And sometimes, if they want to try to meet the needs of the people, government, most governments are ineffective and inefficient. The bureaucracy is too big, and as a result of that, most governments, bureaucracy, they are ineffective. That is why there are certain, projects that the government will be happy to license the private sector and the civil society organizations, the church, to carry out some of these projects, because the civil society organization, including the church, will be effective and efficient in meeting the needs of the people. That is why churches, have to get involved in politics. Prayer alone is not enough. Prayer is important. Dancing is important. Sermonizing is important. Giving our tithes and offerings. All those things are important. But the church must go beyond those things, to contribute towards national development and economic prosperity in our different nations. That is why the government gives, licenses to churches to operate schools, to operate hospitals, to operate orphanages, so that the church will efficiently meet the needs of citizens. So you see, even the secular people understand that the church must get involved in politics, because in a nation, the government alone cannot solve all the social and economic and political problems. That is why the church is classified as a civil society organization, and the government is ready to grant power and resources to the church to be able to meet these needs. That is why big churches in Africa should create schools, primary schools, secondary schools, universities, to train people so that they will have jobs. The churches should open hospitals, to cure diseases. The big churches that have the resources, they should open orphanages to take care of orphans. They should create other institutions in our communities to solve social and economic problems in our communities, because they will do it efficiently. Sometimes these services, cannot be properly done by the government. The government sometimes is inefficient, because most governments, especially in Africa, have adopted a centralized system of government, and a centralized system of government is sometimes inefficient. So the church has to step in, to open schools, hospitals, orphanages, and other, services that will meet the needs of the people. That is how the church can contribute towards national development. This is an important role, a significant role of the church in a democracy. Now, it's not just the institution of the church that can do these things. Individuals, Christians who are members of local churches, who have the means, they too can open schools, they too can open hospitals, they too can open other community organizations to solve, some of the social and economic problems in their communities. For example, people, if you have the calling and you have the resources, you can create an orphanage, to take care of orphans. If women are having a problem, you can create an organization, a non-governmental organization, to help women solve their problems. If all men have problems, you who has that passion to solve that particular problem, you can create a non-governmental organization to help men. If people in a community are taking drugs, you can open, an NGO to solve that social problem. If people are drinking too much, you can open an NGO to solve that problem. If, in your environment, people are littering all over the place, you can open an environmental NGO to solve the problem of waste. You can create a waste management non-governmental organization to clean your environment, to solve the problem of waste in your environment. So the church has a significant role to play in a democracy. The church can contribute towards national development and economic prosperity in our nations. We shouldn't wait for the government to do everything. No. That is why, in the language of governance, we have what is called decentralization, which is defined as the transfer of power from the national government to the private sector and to the civil society organizations. The governments are ready, democracies are ready, governments are ready to transfer power to the church to tackle some of the socio-economic problems in their communities. For example, this platform, we have observed that most countries in Africa have adopted a centralized system of government, and centralization encourages corruption. Centralization encourages inefficiency in the bureaucracy. Centralization encourages conflict, marginalization. Centralization encourages oppression of opponents. So we have decided to create this platform to educate, Christians all over the world, particularly Christians in Africa, that it is time for our governments to abandon a centralized system of government and to adopt a decentralized system of government that mitigates corruption, that mitigates inefficiency, that mitigates intrastate conflicts, that encourages and promotes peace and stability in our communities and nations. This is our own contribution, to bring development and national transformation in Africa. Now, the second role of the church in a democracy is to promote transparency, national transparency. You see, we said from the beginning that there are mainly 4 pillars of power in our nations: the state, the private sector, the civil society organization, and the media. But sometimes in a democracy, the media is corrupt. And, the media these are the people, investigative journalists. These are the people who are trained, to expose undemocratic practices in democracies. These are the people that do investigative journalism to find out and to fish out corrupt politicians. But sometimes the media is corrupt, and the media will not do, the people in the media will not do their jobs. Now, what happens in such a society? The society will continue to be corrupt. So the church has to step in. The Bible says that the church is the pillar of truth. You see, the church is supposed to be the voice of the voiceless. The church is supposed to be the defender of the defenseless. The church is the conscience of the nation. The church is the ground and pillar of truth in a nation. So the church has to step in to hold elected officials accountable for their actions and their deeds in public service. Because sometimes, even in a democracy, political leaders implement policies that are undemocratic. So the church has to speak power, has to hold elected leaders accountable for their actions. The church has to expose injustice in our communities and nations. Why? Because many times we see that the media is corrupt and the media is biased. In order for the people not to continue in their suffering and pain in our communities and society, the church, which is the conscience of the nation and the ground and pillar of truth in our nations, must stand up to hold our elected officials accountable for their actions and their deeds. So the church will, by doing that, the church is promoting transparency and national development in our communities and nations. So the church plays a significant role in national development by opening schools, hospitals, orphanages, and other projects to meet the needs of the people. Secondly, by promoting transparency and stewardship, in our communities and nations, by holding elected officials accountable for their actions and deeds while they are in public office. Thank you so much for watching this video. We are going to continue next time. Until then, bye-bye.